As a species, the human race are accomplished builders. We build homes, roads, and cities, sprawling out across the land and reaching up towards the sky to support our growing population and industries. Not all of our great works of construction are destined to last forever, though. Through abandonment, becoming obsolete, or suffering misfortune, our creations sometimes fall into disuse, becoming strange, forgotten monuments to the past. Few things are as eerie as an abandoned amusement park. Dotty Park in Belgium was once full of excited children and families enjoying all the fun of the fair on roller coasters and other rides. Now, though, what remains of the park is breaking down and rusting under the sun. Dotty Park first opened in 1950 as a place for the children of visitors to the nearby basilica to play. But in 1980, it had been expanded into a fully fledged tourist attraction, welcoming more than 1 million pleasure seekers every year. The 2,600-foot-long Monkey Bridge was the largest of its kind in Europe. Sadly, it fell into poor maintenance, leading to what was billed as the temporary closure of the park after a child had a serious accident in 2000. The park was doomed never to reopen, but despite being scheduled for demolition in 2011, many of the old rides are still standing. It's now a popular site for urban explorers. Some of the buildings we create in wartime have no use during times of peace. That's why the Dagdizel 8th Workshop in Kaspisk, Russia, has been standing empty since 1966, slowly being reclaimed by the Caspian Sea, which it looms above. The purpose of this building, which opened as the Second World War broke out in 1939, was to test naval weapons. It took 4 years to build and suffered difficulties from day one. The often stormy conditions in the area made the building work a difficult job, eventually requiring a huge 45-foot-tall concrete foundation block to be towed to the site to reinforce the foundation in February 1935. Mines and torpedoes were tested from the array below the surface of the water, continuing for 27 years until it was decided that Dagdizel was no longer fit for purpose. All of the expensive military equipment was removed, leaving the concrete shell to crumble away under the force of nature. It's not just Egypt that has pyramids. The Americans have one of their very own in North Dakota. You won't find many tourists scrambling to have their picture taken here, though. The Grand Pyramid is the central focus of the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Program, which can be found in Tacoma. The entire site opened up during the 1960s and was intended to be a multi-billion-dollar state-of-the-art anti-missile system, capable of shooting rockets out of the air in the event of a Russian attack. The pyramid is, by 1960s standards, an advanced radar system, and it's surrounded by missile silos, which were full of surface-to-air thermonuclear missiles. The strategy of the site was to shoot down any rockets fired by Russia as they cruised over Canada. We wonder how the Canadians felt about that. Incredibly, due to safety issues and concerns that the equipment didn't function as anticipated, it was shut down after a mere 3 days of operation, with all the tunnels below the surface flooded to prevent anyone getting in. Now it stands silent, as a reminder of one of America's most expensive military mishaps. These days, Ukraine is a state that's free of nuclear weapons. That wasn't always the case, though. There was a time when it had an impressive stockpile of powerful weapons. But post-disarmament, the bases and silos were all taken apart one by one, with this notable exception. This was the Museum of Strategic Missile Troops, and in its former life, it was a strategic command post and nuclear launch bunker, belonging to the 43rd Rocket Army. Most of the base was kept open to serve as a museum, open for public inspection. Although the missiles had been disarmed for safety reasons, all of the shells remained, along with their fueling vehicles and launching pads. The star of the show, if you want to call it that, is an SS-18 missile, nicknamed Satan. The missile contained 10 separate warheads, each of which was 50 times stronger than the nuclear bomb the Americans dropped on Hiroshima. 100 feet below the surface, you can find the blast-resistant bunker, which was home to a launch crew of 2 specialists. Hauntingly, the launch button is still there. The museum has closed now, leaving all of this doomsday equipment alone under the open sky. To the untrained eye, the shell of the Hot 4 Now 4 site in Belgium is a work of incomprehensible mechanical wonder. Known simply as HF4 to the locals, this used to be the heart of the Cockerel Sombra steelwork plant and was one of the largest in the country. HF4 had a long and proud history, providing employment and producing steel since the early 19th century. Right at the core is this gigantic blast furnace, which generated phenomenal heat to smelt iron ore. By the time the 21st century rolled around, the majority of the steel created here was used by the car manufacturing industry. But that industry almost collapsed in Belgium during the global financial crisis of 2008. With no cars to build, demand for steel ground to a standstill, and the blast furnace found itself with nothing to do. It sat quietly for 4 years before being sold to another production company. But the new company ultimately decided it was antique and obsolete, resulting in HF4's permanent closure. These buildings in Ruskeala look almost like the kind of castles that you might find in a fairy tale. But there would have been nothing quite so pleasant about the working conditions in and around them during the time they were active. This is an old, abandoned marble factory, built in 1880. The towers are actually giant kilns, within which lime was created from calcite marble. Beautiful marble stone was also created here, and then ferried away for sale by a purpose-built railway, which you can still see in some of these images. After over a century of work extracting stone from the ground and treating it, the economic conditions which surrounded the dissolution of the Soviet Union during the early 1990s saw it closed down, never to open for labor again. The plant is in a remote location, and so it stayed free of vandalism and theft. The majority of the buildings are still standing and safe to enter, as is the site's water tower, and the scars it left on the earth around it are still clearly visible in the rock. As the purpose and use of a town or city changes over time, so does the usefulness of the services and buildings that support it. Częstochowa in Poland was one of the country's major centers of industry at the dawn of the 20th century, and was served by the Warsaw-Vienna railway line, which first opened in 1846. From the railway depot, Częstochowa was connected to the center of Europe, and was able to both import and export goods both far and wide. The good times didn't last for Częstochowa, though. It's still the 13th most populated city in the country, but it no longer has a purpose for such a major railway depot, and so both the depot and the trains which once ran from here have been abandoned to time. Weeds are growing through both the rails and the vehicles which once ran on them, which also provide a canvas to aspiring graffiti artists. Some of the pictures taken at the scene look a little like dystopian artwork, but it's a very real place. Buenos Aires in Argentina is a beautiful place to visit. But once upon a time, if you wanted to find a special place to go amid all its beauty, you went to Villa Epecuén. The lakeside retreat was popular with tourists seeking relaxation during the 1920s. But despite being stunning to look at, the lake was more dangerous than anyone realized. There was rarely less than 5,000 tourists here at any one time, bathing in the salty water, which was said to have healing properties. In 1985, healing turned to hurt. Freak localized weather led to a standing wave forming in the lake, which shattered a dam and then plowed through the dike. The entire village sank below 30 feet of salt water, destroying businesses and homes. It took over 30 years for the waters to gradually subside, allowing us our first glimpse of this forgotten resort in 2009. The rotten, bleached white traces of what used to be here are still standing, but sadly the village is completely beyond salvage, and the water can never be trusted again. When a factory closes down suddenly, there sometimes isn't even time to finish the job you were right in the middle of. That's how cars came to be stuck in a state of mid-construction on the production line of the MG Rover plant in Birmingham, which failed and closed in 2005, exactly 100 years after it first opened its doors. The plant, named Longbridge, was essential to employment in the area. More than 25,000 people worked here during its peak years during the 1980s, leaving the local economy devastated by the unexpected closure. There's a light blue Rover 75, now hopelessly out of date, waiting for someone to come back and finish building it. Just down the line are a series of hot air jets, which would have dried the paintwork as it made its way past. Right up until the final day, the owners of the plant tried to find a way to stay in business. When they couldn't, everyone had to leave immediately, abandoning paperwork and computers, and even some personal belongings forgotten in the rush to get out. Everything here is exactly as it was almost 15 years ago, as if the hands of time had simply stopped moving. A racetrack without cars is just a long, empty road, but visitors who know their history can still go there and picture the place as it used to be. You won't find NASCAR races at the North Wilkesboro Speedway anymore, but the track, the stalls, and all the seating are still there in the hope that one day, a big race will come back. With every passing year, the chances of that become less likely. There hasn't been a NASCAR race here since 1996, and the fixtures and fittings are slowly falling apart. Even the flea markets and tractor pulling events that briefly replaced NASCAR don't come anymore. Racing and serving the people who used to come and see the racing was once the staple industry of North Wilkesboro. 17,000 people at a time would come and sit in the seats and take in the action. But 17,000 wasn't enough when NASCAR was booming, so Bristol Motor Speedway, which isn't too far away, became the preferred destination. There are still rumors that one day this silent speedway will roar once more. This seating arrangement in the middle of the desert looks like a set from a Mad Max movie, but it's actually all that remains of a noble but misguided attempt by French artist Din Edel to build a cinema in the middle of nature. Edel's seventh art cinema was scheduled to open in the 1990s, displaying Jurassic Park to excited moviegoers in the outer reaches of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. On what should have been its opening night, the power supply mysteriously failed. Locals say that the authorities severed the connection because Edel didn't have the proper permits, and the power was never restored. Since then, the 700 seats have sat baking and fading in the sun, forgotten. Those who come to visit it have named it the cinema at the end of the world. The projector house still stands, pointed towards the hills in the far distance, as if it could display a movie against the stars of the night sky. But nobody ever sat in these seats and watched a single second of film. The Shiga Prefecture is full of beaches and other tourist attractions, but one of its most popular offerings from 20 years ago, the Koga family land, isn't open for business anymore. It was once a theme park and fairground, offering rides and excitements to people of all ages. But its gentle form of entertainment was low intensity compared to more modern amusement parks, and it finally found itself unable to pay the bills sometime around the late 1990s. Much of what used to be here has been torn down and scrapped, including its famous cable car ride. But the giant Ferris wheel is still standing, as are the cars, seats, and tracks of many of the larger rides. Perhaps the most chilling of all the things we can find here is a wall full of drawings by children, which have somehow survived exposure to wind and weather to appear as colorful as they were on the day they were drawn. The children who made the pictures will now all be adults, and the park exists only in their memory. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.